Dr. Porter.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, everything's good.
Okay, perfect.
So nice to actually see your face. We've been emailing, but so nice to actually talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. All right, so we'll wait a few moments maybe and just let some people join, and then we'll get started with our vaccine Mythbuster live stream with Dr. Porter.
Sure.
All right, so we'll start with some introductions. So I am the host. I'm Victoria. I'm in my second year of behavioral cognition and neuroscience at the University of Windsor. I just joined Science Society this year. I'm the second year science rep. And throughout this whole vaccine distribution process, I have been the social media co-lead of Windsor VaxFinders, which is an organization that just posts about information about the vaccine distribution, appointment times, pop-ups, etc. And so I'll pass it on to Dr. Porter to introduce herself.
Hi, so I'm Dr. Lisa Porter. I'm a professor in biomedical sciences at the University of Windsor, and I'm the executive director of WeSpark Health Institute. And I'm a cancer researcher by trade, but throughout the COVID pandemic, I've been leading the saliva screening lab and also doing a lot of vaccine advocacy.
Awesome. Aiden, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Aiden Matrevsky. I'm going into my fourth year at the University of Windsor in bio, and I am the VP of External Affairs on Science Society this upcoming year. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, so if you guys have any questions, you're free to pop your question in the chat, and Aiden will either interject if I don't see it, or we'll definitely get your questions answered. But if nobody has any questions right now, I will start with some general questions for Dr. Porter. And the first one being a very big question that a lot of people are concerned about in Windsor specifically is, does the vaccine affect fertility?
No. So there's no evidence to say that the vaccine affects fertility in any way. One of the things that we know can affect fertility is COVID. So getting COVID, we know there's really papers that show convincing evidence that it affects especially females. So being able to get pregnant, but also for those that are pregnant, it causes preterm labor and lots of problems with the actual fetus. So I think that this is more of our concern, is protecting you against COVID because of the documented effects of COVID.
Yeah, that's really an awesome answer, especially because that's a huge myth that is being spread like wildfire right now. So I
don't even know where it began.
There's disadvantages and advantages to social media, and that was definitely one of the disadvantages that we saw. Okay, if nobody has any questions, I'll start with, if I'm young and healthy, why would I need to get vaccinated?
Yeah, great point. So we do know, of course, that the severe effects of COVID are less prevalent in those under 30 years old, and certainly under the age of 10. But between, especially between 18 and 30, there are a significant number of people that are put into intensive care, hospitalized. So the threats are real, even death. There was one study of about 3,000 COVID-infected patients between the ages of 18 and 30, and almost 3% of those people died. So, it varied between study to study. It also varies for ethnic background, what your severe effects are going to be. Also, if you have comorbidities, so diabetes, high blood pressure, some people might not even know they have these things until they get COVID, and then you are susceptible for really severe effects. Also, we're just now finding out what the long-term effects of COVID are going to be. For example, I have a student in my lab actually that was affected by COVID and continues to have long-term effects and effects to the kidneys, for example. And this is a very young, healthy person. And so, time is going to tell what those long-term effects are going to be, but I don't think we want to mess with that. One of the other things we know is that the young population while you might remain asymptomatic and not even know you have COVID in some cases, you can still, of course, pass COVID along to others. And there are people in the community, certainly those under the age of 12, who can't become vaccinated yet. So you're protecting somebody's little sister, but also people that are immunocompromised and might not mount a really good defense against COVID. And of course, those that can't be vaccinated at all. And so, really, in a big way, vaccination is altruistic. It's protecting other people. And so I think there's both selfish reasons to get vaccinated, but also ones that are completely altruistic and thinking about those people around you.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. So there's a question in the chat from is, could you give us a little professional insight as to how a vaccine was developed in such a timely manner?
Yeah. So, from a research perspective, a lot of what holds research back is both money and red tape. And so one of the things that is a big falsity about the COVID vaccines is that they didn't undergo the proper research. And in fact, that's not true at all. They underwent randomized, double-blind clinical trials involving tens of thousands of people in different centers around the world, covering all demographics. So it was very, very thoroughly researched. What it didn't face was money, barriers, and red tape. And, I think this really shows that if we get everybody working against a health problem together, what we can achieve. And COVID was a true example of that. And so certainly there's no shortage of research done on COVID. It has monopolized the literature over the past year and a half. And it's pretty much one of the most well-researched topics on the planet. And it's really about the amount of resources that were thrown at it.
Yes, yeah, that's definitely a great point. So you mentioned earlier about the long-term effects that you're seeing or that we're seeing as a population with COVID. Is there any long-term effects for the vaccine that haven't been seen yet or are being seen?
Well, of course, long-term effects requires time. So, this would become a long-term question. But one of the things that we know is that the adjuvants and everything that are used in these vaccines are things that we've been researching for decades and have no effects. Also, these the vaccines, the adenovirus vaccine, for example, is one that the actual technology has been around for many, many years, and so it's just changing the virus that we're focusing it in on. So, it would be almost a miracle if there was anything outside of what we already know. The mRNA vaccines, I would say, are a medical miracle. This is an amazing technology. And, there's decades of research on mRNA. We know what it does. And one of the things about this, both vaccines actually don't stick around for very long. The Pfizer vaccine, you've heard that it has to be stored in a minus 80 temperature because outside in room temperature, it actually degrades very quickly. And in fact, when it gets at 37 degrees inside your body, this is not going to stick around for very long. So it goes into your bloodstream. It tricks your immune system into thinking that you have the virus, and then it's degraded. And so it's just like a very temporal, hint of having the virus. What we do know is that if you actually had COVID, the virus then is able to get into your cells, which this vaccine cannot, and will have long-term effects. So the long-term effects of the vaccine, from a scientific perspective, there's no reason for anybody to worry that you're going to have anything outside of the 24 hours, 48-hour sort of vaccine flu that you get because your immune system is doing its job.
Yeah. So you mentioned something about like the adenovirus and the mRNA vaccine types. Could you just go into a little bit of detail about how those vaccines work?
Sure. So an adenovirus vaccine is just a little piece. And so all the vaccines that have been made actually are against one piece of SARS-CoV-2, against the spike protein. And this is basically an antenna on the virus that allows it to get into your cells. And so what they did was just take a tiny little piece of that antenna and mimic it in two different ways. So one, the adenovirus vector is just a piece of that SARS-CoV-2 antenna. So they actually just take a piece of it and they use that, but it can't get into your cells. It isn't the actual virus. And then the mRNA vaccines they take an actual code, a piece of the mRNA, and they just inject that. So your body actually translates this into another message. And so basically, they're doing the exact same thing. It's just using a different vector, if you will. But they're exactly the same idea, even against the same piece of the virus.
Yeah, I think that's a really awesome question to answer because I think that there's not a lot of education about how these vaccines actually work, especially for the general public. So I think that's a really awesome answer to share with everyone. So we have another question. So what is the rush on ensuring our community receives their second dose as well? Does that slight increase in efficacy make a significant difference in the fight against COVID?
So one of the things we know is that first, and there's all different strategies for vaccination. Some, like your MMR, for example, you get one shot, and even the Janssen COVID vaccine works with one shot. So it's a little bit higher of a dose at one time, and we know that you can get a lasting immune response. Another strategy is to give you a slightly lower dose in the first time. So your body is going to sort of recognize it, start to build up some immunity, and then by giving the second dose, it basically just refines your immune system and gives you a little bit longer lasting immunity. So it's really, there's no right or wrong to this. I think it's, and again, something that people might play around with in the future, but it's one strategy of delivering vaccines and something that's been done for decades. So, for example, hepatitis B is given in multiple boosters, just using a similar kind of strategy.
Yeah. Okay, and can you get COVID-19 from the vaccine?
No. So the vaccines are not the virus. They're only a tiny little piece of the virus. And some of the things that I hear, people, when you get your vaccine, and I know myself, the next day you feel terrible, you get a fever, etc. This is your body looking at only a tiny little piece of the virus. And that little tiny piece only sticks around for a few hours. So it's gone. And yet your body had that kind of immune response. Imagine if you had the actual COVID-19. So in that case, your body's seeing the entire virus. The virus is invading into your cells and it's doing all of its job and it's not going away. It's actually reproducing. So the vaccine doesn't get inside your cells. It isn't the virus. It can't replicate. It just goes in there, tricks your immune system, and then rapidly gets degraded.
Yeah, I think that's, again, another huge myth that is such a great point about, it's just a small part of it. Imagine if you actually got the whole thing, right? It definitely sucks for the first, 24 to 48 hours, but then it obviously is worth it in the end. So what is in the COVID-19 vaccine?
So the vaccine actually has some lipids. So these are just, lipid-based molecules that allow the vaccine to be sort of, protected so that it isn't rapidly degraded right away. And some sugars. The sugars also will allow it to be able, especially in the Pfizer case, it allows it to be frozen and not to degrade. And so really that's what all of the components are different varieties of sugars and lipids that are necessary for the viral backbone to remain around for long enough for your immune system to respond to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely another important answer to a question about what's actually in the vaccine. So now we'll move on to some audience submitted questions from our post. If there's no questions currently in the chat. So Ben 410 asked, who is liable if I suffer complications from the vaccine?
So, we have Health Canada has a reporting mechanism. And in the US, the CDC is where they report anything. But, liability for the vaccine there is no legal liability. The chances of somebody having a severe response to vaccination, there are some people who maybe have allergies in the past to some of the sort of lipid materials that are put into the vaccine. This is very few. In fact, in the past, they used to use sort of an egg-based material. So people with egg allergies, for example, might have an allergic reaction. Gradually, these things have been refined in vaccination. So very few people have any type of very severe effects. When they did the randomized double-blind clinical trials, so this is, for example, they take a group of 30,000 people, divide you into two groups of 15,000, and deliver either the placebo, so this is just the lipid and sugar kind of backbone, or the actual vaccine. And there was no statistical across it. Now it's literally in the millions of people that have been involved in these trials. There was no severe effects that were different in vaccine and placebo. So one of the things, you read and you hear about people having even the blood clot issue, to be honest, it is a responsibility of Health Canada and CDC to pay attention to reports and continue to monitor, and this is why they do this. But even if you look at the data, the incidence of blood clots, for example, was no different between those injected with a placebo versus the virus, versus the vaccine. And so this tells us that, within a population of, say, 30,000, there are going to be some people that within the next few weeks are going to have a blood clot, because blood clots are very prevalent in our society. And so following off one-offs is actually, we're looking at worldwide, blood clots, 37 incidences, when blood clots in certain populations happen at the rate of about 100,000 in the UK, for example, per year. And so, I get it that people are right now very concerned because we're asking for large numbers of people to become vaccinated. But honestly, vaccination is pretty much the most well-tested, best modern, miracle of modern medicine, and is extremely safe and extremely effective. Out of all of the types of medicines you can take, vaccination is among the most safe and effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Even your blood clot point, just looking at that base rate information, and, especially females who take birth control, there's many things that affect the amount of the blood clot rate. So that's definitely an important fact or information to keep in mind.
Just even scientifically, there's nothing in the vaccine that can cause blood clots. It doesn't make any sense. And the small number reported, if you look at an actual controlled study, it falls within the control. So there's no statistical reason for people to be worried. This is really within the margin. I mean, there's a chance that any day, any of us can have certain effects, but as far as being related to the vaccine, there's no data to support this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important for us to consider the things that can happen just through daily life that doesn't necessarily correlate with the vaccine. Yeah. So if there's no more questions, we'll start ending our live. Thank you so much, Dr. Porter, for joining us and explaining everything and answering our questions. So for those who missed part of the live stream or want to watch it later, Aiden will upload the live stream to the IGTV on our Science Society Instagram account, and you guys can feel free to watch it or just review any of the statements that Dr. Porter made. So thank you, everybody.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for joining, everybody. Thanks, Dr. Porter. Good job.
Bye.